Hello everyone, this is part 3 on how to make a tower defense game in Scratch. In this tutorial, I'll be making the towers actually aim and shoot at the enemies. If you haven't seen parts 1 or 2, check them out, links are in the description below. Anyways, before we start, I just want to say that this video will probably be the most complicated part of this entire series, because in order to make the towers aim and shoot, we will have to use lots of lists and variables. But don't be worried if it seems too confusing, because once we finish coding the turrets, the rest of the game will be much easier to make. Also, I'll try to explain my code in simpler terms so that it's easier to follow. Anyways, let's get started. So in part 2, we did all of the preparation for the towers to aim and shoot at the enemies by creating all of these enemy lists. And in this video, we can now actually start coding the turrets. So let's go to the turret sprite, and then I am going to create a new custom block. So let's go to my blocks, and then I'll click make a block. And I'll call this something like turret, aim, and shoot. So turret, aim, and shoot. And then I'll click the OK button. And of course, this custom block is going to handle all of the aiming and shooting for the turret. So I'm going to drag this over here. And now for the turret to choose which enemy to aim at, we have to first create a few new variables. So I'm going to create a new variable, and I'll call this one something like target enemy number. Okay, and then select for the sprite only. Alright, and then I'll create another one called, let's call it enemy check number, and then also select for the sprite only. And for now, this will do. So inside of this turret aim and shoot block, let's set the target enemy number to, let's say, none. And the reason I'm using none instead of 0 is because none means that the turret is currently targeting no enemies. However, 0 might be the number of the enemy target. And then let's also set the enemy check number to 0. And this variable is going to help loop through all of the enemies in our enemy list. So now I think I'll first create the code for all of the turret aiming part, and then I'll explain how the code works later. So first off, let's go into control. And then I'm going to grab a repeat loop, and then I'll drag this right after all of these set variable blocks. And then I'll go into variables and go into lists, and then I will drag the length of enemy IDs list block, and I'll put this inside of the repeat. So pretty much we're repeating through the entire list of all of the enemies on the screen. So now inside of this repeat loop, I am going to change the enemy check number by 1, and then I'm going to create another variable, and I'll call this something like enemy check number ID, and then select for this sprite only. Alright, and inside of this repeat, I am going to set the enemy check number ID to, let's go to lists. Let's grab a item 1 of enemy IDs, and then I'm going to grab the enemy check number, so item enemy check number of enemy IDs. And then let's drag this inside of the set enemy check number ID. Alright, and now let's check the distance of each enemy that we are looping through to check that if the enemies are in range of the turret. So I'm going to go to my blocks, and then create a new block, and I'll call this something like distance to enemy, and then select OK. Alright, and then I'll drag this over here. And now we need a variable to track the distance of each enemy from the turret. So let's go to variables, and then I will create another new variable, and I'll call this something like enemy distance. And again, I'll select for the sprite only, and then click OK. And inside of this distance to enemy block, I am going to set the enemy distance to the distance formula. And by the way, what we are doing is the same thing as the distance to block. However, we can't do distance to enemy because this block only checks the distance from the original enemy sprite and not any of the clones. So instead, we have to use the formula to calculate distance. And to do that, let's go to operators, and then I will grab a absolute value of block, and then I'll change this to square root of, and then I will grab a minus operator, and we need to get the x and y positions of the enemies. So inside of this block, I am actually going to edit it and then add 2 number inputs, and this way we can drag in our x position and y positions of the enemy clones. So I'll call this enemy X and enemy Y. Okay. And now I am actually going to find the difference between the enemy X and the turret X position. So enemy X minus X position. And then I have to multiply these two. So I have to duplicate and then go to operators, grab a multiplication operator, and then drag this on the left side and drag this on the right side. All right. And then I have to do the same thing for the Y positions. So I'm going to duplicate this. And then instead of enemy X, I will do enemy Y. So for both of these. And then instead of the X position, I will do Y position. All right. And lastly, let's add these two together. So the X positions go on the left, and then the Y positions go on the right. All right. And then let's drag all of this inside of the square root of block. So drag this instead of here. And now we should be fine. So let's drag this inside of the enemy distance to. And now this block should give us the distance from any enemy X and enemy Y. All right, cool. So now I can drag the distance to enemy block inside of here. So I'm going to drag this inside of the repeat. All right. And then now I am going to right-click duplicate this part. So right-click duplicate. And I will change the enemy check number to enemy check number ID. And I will change the enemy IDs part to enemy X. All right, cool. Now I will right-click duplicate this again and do this for the Y. So item enemy check number ID of enemy Y. All right. So now we just put the enemy X and enemy Y positions inside of the distance to enemy block. So now we want to check which enemy the turret should target. So let's go to control, and I'm going to drag a if and put this inside of the repeat. And I will check, first of all, if the enemy distance is less than the view radius of the turret. So let's go to variables, and then I will drag the enemy distance variable. And by the way, we set the enemy distance variable in here. So if enemy distance is less than the view radius, and also this variable is currently not set, but I will set it later. So anyways, if enemy distance is less than view radius, and then I'll drag an AND operator. So AND, we want to also make the turret shoot the furthest enemy. So I am going to go to variables and go inside the lists. And then I will drag an item of block. So item 1 of enemy IDs. And then I will drag a enemy check number ID inside of this part. And instead of enemy IDs, I will do enemy progress. All right. And we want to check if the item enemy check number ID of enemy progress is greater than the furthest enemy distance that the turret currently has on record. So in this case, we have to create another new variable, and I'll call this something like furthest enemy distance. Okay, and then I will select for this by only, and then click OK. And let's drag that variable inside of the right side. So if the item enemy check number ID of enemy progress is greater than furthest enemy distance. And now let's drag this on the right side of the AND. And let's drag all of this inside of the if. Alright, so for this part, the turret pretty much checks which enemy is the furthest along in its range. And then if it detects the furthest enemy, then we are going to set the furthest enemy distance to, of course, item enemy check number ID of enemy progress, which is the enemy that is the furthest along the track. And then I am going to set the target enemy number to the enemy check number ID. Alright, so this code right here is the part where the turret checks for the furthest enemy inside of its range. So what this repeat loop does is that it loops through all of the existing enemies on the map through the enemy IDs list, and then this part checks the distance from each individual enemy to the turret clone, and that distance is put into the enemy distance variable. Then it checks if an enemy is inside of the area of the turret range, and if the enemy has made the most progress, which means it's the furthest to most enemy on the track, and then it sets these two variables and makes it the enemy that the turret will target. So the important part of this loop is that we want to know the furthest enemy in range of the turret, which is put into this variable. So now that we know the specific enemy that the turret will target, we now have to actually make the turret point towards it. So let's go to control, and then I'm going to drag in if, and check, first of all, if the target enemy number is not none. So that means if we have a targeted enemy, so I'm going to drag and equals, and then go to variables, grab a target enemy number, and type in none. Alright, so if the turret currently has an enemy to aim at, then let's grab an if else, and then drag it inside of here, and then I am going to first check if let's go to variables, and then drag the item of block. So if the item target enemy number of enemy X is greater than the turret X position, by the way, I'll explain this later, but let's do this for now. So if the item target enemy number of enemy X is greater than X position, then I will make the turret point towards, so let's grab a point in direction block, and then let's make the turret point towards the enemy. So to do that, let's go to operators, and then grab a minus operator. Alright. And then this part might seem a bit complicated, so just stay with me here, but let's grab an abs of block and change this to atan. Okay. And then inside of here, let's copy this one. So atan of item target enemy number of enemy Y, and let's grab a minus operator, and then go to motion, and then grab a Y position of the turret. Alright, and then I'm going to drag this actually inside of here, so item target enemy number of enemy Y minus Y position, and then I will drag this inside of the atan block for now. Alright, and then I'm going to go to operators, grab a divided by operator, and then I will duplicate this, and I will change this to enemy X, and change this to minus X position. Alright, and then I will drag this on the right side of the divided by, and I will drag this on the left side of the divided by. So this should be item target enemy number of enemy Y minus Y position divided by item target enemy number of enemy X minus X position. Alright, cool. And now let's drag this inside of the atan. Alright. Oops. Let's try it again. Alright, cool. And then lastly, let's drag this inside of the right side of the minus operator. And for this part, I'll put in 90. Alright, and lastly, I will duplicate this, put it inside of the else, and change the positive 90 to negative 90. And now we should be fine. Alright, so this complicated block right here does all of the turret pointing. So first, of course, we check if an enemy is in range, and then if it is, then we make the tower point towards the enemy. And this part seems like a super complicated piece of code, but it's actually translated from a trigonometry math equation. So if you're interested, I'll just quickly explain it. So you want to find the differences in the Y and the X between the tower and the enemy. So the enemy Y minus the tower Y, and the enemy X minus the tower X. And then using the equation tan angle equals differences in Y over differences in X, you can find the angle which is equal to the inverse tan of the difference of Y over the difference of X, which is atan. And this block only works for 180 degrees of the turret rotation, so I copied this block but changed the 90 to negative 90 to make the other 180 degrees work. Again, you might have no idea what I just said, but that's okay because this is probably the most confusing part of this entire series, and it will make more sense once you know trigonometry. So now there are a few more things we have to do before we can test it out. So first of all, I'm going to check over here. So I'm going to first drag a set and then change this to furthest enemy distance. And I'll set this to something like -999. Okay. And this is just to make sure, before we loop through all the enemies, that we reset the furthest enemy distance. Alright, and for the turret aim and shoot block, I will actually edit this and change it to run without screen refresh. Okay. And now lastly, I am going to drag the turret aim and shoot block inside of the else. So once we place down the turret, then it can start aiming and shooting. Alright, and one last thing, inside of the turret range circle sprite, I am going to set the view radius to something like, let's just try 100 for now. And by the way, this is going to be the radius where the turret can detect the enemy. So now once we have that, let's try it out. So if we place a turret, then it should, as you can see, aim towards the first enemy until it goes out of range. Alright, cool. So I am going to hide all of these variables and then try it again. So if we place a turret, then it should aim, as you can see, once it enters its range, and then once it leaves, it goes to the next closest enemy in the range. Okay, so one thing I want to do is that I want the turret range to still show once you place down the turret. So let's go inside of the turret range sprite, and for now, I will actually just make it always show. So let's drag the show inside of the forever loop. Alright, and now the turret range should always show on our newly placed turrets. Alright, cool. So as you can see, it targets the furthest enemy in its range. And alright, cool. Let's try it again. Okay, as you can see, it targets the enemies over there, and now over here. And I think it should target them over here as well, but okay, maybe not. But yeah, now let's make the turrets actually shoot the enemies. So inside of the turret sprite, let's see. So I'm going to go to variables and then create a new variable. And I will call this can shoot. Alright. And then I will select for the sprite only and click OK. Alright. And now under the when I start as a clone, I am going to set the can shoot variable to no. Okay, and then inside of the turret aim and shoot block, I am going to add some more code on the bottom here. And I'm going to check if and then can shoot is equal to yes. Alright, then I'm going to go inside of the lists and drag a replace item 1 of block and drag it inside of here. And I will replace the target enemy number of enemy progress with, let's say, dead. Alright, that means that we shot an enemy. And then after that, I will drag something like a wait 0.8 seconds. Okay. And then inside of the if not target enemy equals to none, then I will drag a set can shoot to yes. And lastly, right at the beginning here, I will set a can shoot to no. Alright, so pretty much now, once the turret detects an enemy, then it's going to set can shoot to yes. And then that means that the turret will destroy an enemy and then wait 0.8 seconds before aiming and shooting again. Alright, and now we have to make the enemy actually die once it gets shot. So inside of the enemy sprite, I am going to go inside of operators and then drag an OR operator. Alright, and then I'm going to check if, go to variables, and then inside of the lists, if the item of clone number of enemy progress is equal to dead, and then or if it's touching the edge, then we will delete the enemy. Alright, so that's our simple way to destroy our enemy. And actually a few more things. First off, inside of the turret, I am actually going to drag the if can shoot equals to yes part outside of our custom block and instead put it after the turret aim and shoot. So over here, and then inside of the enemy sprite, I am also going to check if, and then grab a not, and if not, let's right click duplicate this part. So if not item clone number of enemy progress is equal to dead. So we have to check if the clone is not dead, then we do the enemy movement. All right. And now everything should work. So if we try it out, then once we place down a turret, it should aim and destroy enemies. All right, cool. So it seems to work. Let's try it again. Somewhere over here. Okay. All right. If it plays 2, then it works as normal. Okay, let me try it again. All right. And it seems to work. All right, cool. So it destroys enemies like so. Alright, so one last thing I want to do is that I want the enemy to switch to a different costume right before it dies. So I'm going to go inside of the costumes, and then I am going to create a new costume, and I'm going to make it like a popping image as if the enemy exploded. So I'm going to make that really quickly. Alright, so this is my popping image, and now inside of the code, I am going to make it switch to the popping image. And also, I'm going to add something like a wait 0.05 seconds, and then delete the clone. All right, so switch costume to the pop image, wait, and then delete. So let's try it out. Once the turret destroys an enemy, then as you can see, it does that tiny pop, and then it hides. All right, cool. I might make it a bit larger though, so I will increase the size a bit. All right, now let's try it again. And nice. I think that makes it look a bit better. All right, and there we go. Now we have a turret that can aim and shoot. Anyways, that's it for this tutorial. If you enjoyed it, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe too if you haven't already. In the next video, I'll work on the turret a bit more and make it so that you can click the turret to show the range and other stuff like that. By the way, this project is shared on my Scratch profile. Link is in the description below. Anyways, that's it for this tutorial. See ya!